All right, I'm going to put you in the driver's seat for a second. You're faced with an impossible choice. This is honestly one of the biggest ethical questions of our time, and the answer, well, it might just come from this massive global experiment that involved millions of people. So, picture this. A self-driving car's brakes suddenly fail. It's now barreling towards an unavoidable crash and has to make an impossible choice. And look, this isn't some far-off sci-fi scenario. This is a very real problem that AI engineers are wrestling with right now. Okay, so what does it do? Does it stay the course and hit, say, 3 elderly pedestrians? Or does it swerve, saving them but sacrificing its own 3 passengers instead? I mean, there's no easy answer here, is there? But a choice has to be made. And like I said, this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. This is a real-world problem that engineers and policymakers are tangling with as we speak. Because think about it, before we can really let these cars loose on our roads, we all have to agree on the moral rulebook they should follow when things go sideways. You see, for us to actually feel comfortable sharing the road with these things, the public has to be on board. We need to understand and actually agree with the moral code they're programmed with. At the end of the day, trust is everything. And that trust can only be earned if we're totally transparent about how these life or death decisions are made. So that's the big question, right? How in the world do you figure out what the entire planet thinks about an issue this complicated? Well, some researchers at MIT came up with a pretty brilliant answer. What they did was they built this thing called the moral machine. It's basically a serious game. So it's this online platform available in a bunch of languages, and its whole purpose was to throw these exact same moral dilemmas at people all over the world. It recorded every single choice, building this huge global database of our moral instincts. And the response? It was absolutely staggering. The platform just went viral. It ended up collecting almost 40 million individual decisions from every corner of the globe. This wasn't just some little online survey, This was a massive, totally unprecedented effort to gather data on human morality. And you can just see from this map how incredibly far it reached. So what was the result of all this? Well, we got the first ever detailed map of our collective moral preferences when it comes to the ethics of machines. Okay, so what did all that data actually tell us? Once the researchers started digging into it, a few really clear patterns started to pop out. These were areas where there was broad global agreement, the kind of thing that could maybe, just maybe, form the basis for a universal machine ethic. And here's the incredible part. Despite all of our different cultures, all our different backgrounds, the data pointed to some ethical lines in the sand that pretty much everyone, everywhere agrees on. So what were they? Well, people overwhelmingly chose to save humans over animals. No surprise there, maybe. They also chose to save as many lives as possible over fewer lives. And they chose to prioritize saving the young over the old. These 3 principles were, by far, the clearest takeaways from the whole experiment. And you can see there's a real hierarchy here. Sparing humans over pets? That was the big one, by far the strongest preference. But saving more lives and saving the young were also incredibly powerful factors driving people's choices. But, and this is a big but, this is where things get really complicated, because these strong public opinions can run smack into real-world policy. Take Germany, for instance. Their official government guidelines explicitly prohibit making any distinction based on age. That's a direct contradiction of what the global public seems to want. So beyond those few areas of global agreement, the picture starts to get a whole lot murkier. And what it reveals are some really deep-seated cultural divides. See, the data didn't just show us what we agree on, it also gave us a map of our disagreements. The researchers used a technique called clustering analysis to group countries together based on similar ethical choices. And what they found were 3 major moral neighborhoods, you could say, across the globe. They broadly defined these clusters as Western, Eastern, and Southern. And each of these groups showed really different priorities on certain key questions. It strongly suggests that our geography and our culture play a massive role in how we think about these dilemmas. And the differences are just fascinating when you dig in. For example, that preference for saving the young, it was way less pronounced in the Eastern cluster. Meanwhile, the Southern cluster showed a much stronger tendency to spare higher status individuals. That was a factor that barely even registered in the other groups. So the key takeaway here is pretty clear. Our deep-seated cultural values are directly reflected in the moral choices we want our machines to make. For instance, cultures that are more collectivistic tended to show a weaker preference for sparing the young. Why? Well, it likely reflects a greater cultural value placed on respecting your elders. Okay, so after looking at all this data, where we agree and where we are worlds apart, what's the bottom line? What does all this actually mean for the future of AI ethics? Well, for one thing, the moral machine didn't just hand us a simple answer. It didn't solve the problem with one single universal rule. In fact, you could argue it proved that a one-size-fits-all solution might not even be possible, or maybe not even desirable. Instead of an answer, what it gave us was a detailed map of our disagreements. It showed us exactly where we differ and even gave us clues as to why. It created a common language, a foundation built on actual data, so we can finally have a more informed, more nuanced global conversation about this stuff. So it all comes back to the real question, doesn't it? Who gets to program the car's conscience? Do we go with a universal rule, maybe based on those three things we all seem to agree on? Or should a car's ethics actually change depending on the country it's driving in? Should a car in Tokyo make a different decision than a car in Paris? Look, there are no easy answers here. This experiment didn't give us the final word, but it absolutely gave us the first one. It started a global conversation that we desperately need to have. Because as these machines become more and more a part of our world, the real question isn't just for the engineers or the philosophers anymore. It's for all of us. What do you think they should do?